Well, Raider Nation, let's keep it real. That was a horrible game for the Silver and Black. Look, these are the type of games that I didn't think we would see from Pete Carroll, from a Pete Carroll-led team. I thought things were going to be different with him at the helm. I think a lot of you guys at home did as well, but the same kind of thing we see pop up for the Raiders. They're good for a couple of these each and every year. I know a lot of people went after Antonio Pierce because he had 9 double-digit losses in his tenure, saying that was an issue, the inexperience, all those things. Well, now 2 times in 6 days, a Pete Carroll coach team suffers back-to-back 10-point or more losses. Obviously today, a really brutal one. And excuse me here as I continue to kind of go through some notes throughout the day here. I'll be going back and forth off of my computer for those of you guys that are watching. But just one of those games that's a bit of a head-scratcher and is disheartening. I know for a lot of you guys at home, for all of you guys in Raider Nation, this is one of those things where you say, here we go again. You can feel it when you walk in the locker room. Obviously, Max and everybody in there saying the right things, saying they're going to go back to work and all that stuff. But this was a big opportunity for these guys to rebound after a really tough loss to the Chargers on Monday Night Football. A poor showing from Geno, which I thought he actually played well given the situation that he's thrust into. But obviously in this game, it comes down to the offensive line being horrible, the defense giving up way too many big plays, and just an overall dysfunction on special teams as well. It was kind of combined. You add it all up, and it's a recipe for disaster for the Raiders on the road here right from the jump. Obviously, you see Debo right away with the 69-yard return on the opening kickoff, and you start to wonder and scratch your head and say, uh-oh, is this going to be one of those days? And obviously, it did turn out to be that. Now, let's start first with the offensive line. Obviously, some weirdness going on before the game starts. Jackson Powers-Johnson back and cleared from the concussion, but they actually stick with Alex Kappa after the game. Pete Carroll said that they thought on the short week 6 days ago, they wanted to throw Kappa back out there and keep the continuity going, give Jackson a bit more time as well. Obviously, that didn't work out. He noted that did too. But then he did say that the competition continues at guard between those guys. I don't know how it can. And I do think that the conversation needs to be had of, do they move Jackson Powers-Johnson back to center? Now, if you're asking me, I don't think they're going to do that. I think they're going to roll with this group at least for the next couple weeks, which I know is frustrating for you guys at home. Again, I'm not saying that's what I think should happen. I'm just saying that's my read on what I think is going to happen there. I know so many people are calling for Pete to fire his son, Brendan Carroll, the offensive line coach. That's also not going to happen. And I get the frustrations there, but what's the response? Who ends up sliding to that spot? There's no way that it gets better when you fire your coach there this early into the season. We're only 3 games in for the Raiders. So I hate to say have some patience there because I believe me, I know how ridiculous that sounds, especially with how bad this one was. But I'm just going to rattle off some stats to that point about how insane it was for the offensive line in this game. 28 pressures allowed, 4 QB hits, 15 hurries, 5 unblocked pressures, and 5 sacks. Now, this is against a Commanders team that only had 4 total sacks the entire season in the previous 2 games. Coming to this one, they obviously obliterate that. The offensive line had no answer for their guys up front, and really each and every guy up front took turns really dropping the ball. There was no room for Ashton-Jeanty to run. I mean, they had 0.6 yards before contact. Obviously, we had seen, I think, entering this game, they had negative 0.23 yards before contact. Obviously, it's a bit of an improvement at 0.6, but you can't even get to 1 yard before you're getting hit into the backfield. There's not much that Ashton-Jeanty can do. Now, we did see at times he was effective, but it's clear that the offensive line is going to dictate where this team goes. Obviously, now it's easy in revisionist history to go back and say, well, why do you take a running back there when you need to address the offensive line? We saw the staff last year take a gamble on this offensive line. It didn't work. Thus far, 3 games in, it looks like it's not working right now either. Again, what's the answer going to be? Because they don't have the guys, the depth pieces that they can slot in there. So I do think, again, they're going to sit there and roll with the group that they got. The only other thing you could see is maybe DJ Glaze gets taken out, which we saw at one point, I believe it was in the second quarter. He kind of waved to the sideline, needed a breather of some sorts, or maybe he was dealing with a little bit of an injury or something, went out for a play. It was the final play of that series, that third down. Stone Forsythe came out there, tackle. And look, I know he's another guy that Raider Nation doesn't want to see out there either. So I don't know what the answer is for it, which I know is frustrating to say, but the Raiders have to figure something out up there. To me, it does scream coaching when you see that you've got 5 unblocked pressures, particularly one of the sacks by Bobby Wagner comes to mind, where Dylan Parham just kind of looks at him, gives him a shove. Obviously, he was thinking that Meredith was going to be coming over for that. But and I'm no expert on offensive line play, but that just doesn't seem like the right read for me on that one. Obviously, I believe that's one where Parham probably has to pick him up. And just, again, overall, it's misdiagnosing blitzes, stunts, and then also just getting beat one-on-one. That's a big issue. You look in the run game in particular, too, for the offensive line. As soon as the ball snapped, boom, the posture is right, standing straight up. So obviously there's nothing you're going to be able to get going in that regard for Ashton Jeanty running the ball. So one of those days where you leave, obviously, again, like I said, feeling real disheartened if you're a Raiders fan, scratching your head wondering, is this another one of those rough seasons for us already? Now, we'll see against the Bears. Obviously, this is a Bears team that struggled. They're playing right now as I'm taping this, so obviously I don't know what ends up happening, in the Bears game there. But this is one of those deals where if you're the Raiders, excuse me, you really got to take a long, hard look in the mirror because, again, this offense isn't going to go nowhere if the offensive line can't get rolling. On the flip side, defensively, we go and see it's 8 explosive plays of 10 or more yards that they allowed, passing, running, and then also if you count the special teams miscues as well, that's 10 plays of 10 or more yards. Obviously, some that went for huge yardage, 60 plus. You just can't have that in any regard. And obviously, I'm not breaking any news by saying that. And I'll be honest with you guys, this is a hard one to break down because it was so bad. The tackling obviously wasn't there. This is a Raiders team that had fared so well against the run through the first couple weeks of the season. As I looked through my notes here, I looked at they had allowed 141 yards total in the first 2 games, and it allowed an average of 3.2 yards per rush in those first 2 games. In the first half alone in this game, they go and allow 174 rushing yards and 10.2 yards per rush. Obviously, a big chunk of that was the big 60-yarder there by Jeremy McNichols. But, man, you just can't allow something like that. There were 4 players that had 20 or more rushing yards in the first half alone. Obviously, Marcus Mariota gave him some issues. I think coming into this game, a lot of people felt pretty good going up against the backup in Marcus Mariota. I did. Obviously, Matt Perrault, when we spoke to him, on Raiders Rounders early in the week, he said that he was still taking the Commanders with or without Jaden Daniels. He had the faith in Marcus Mariota, and obviously he proved to be able to do enough, but I think this is one of those things where the Raiders made it real easy on him. Also got to give a bit of a kudos and a hat tip to Cliff Kingsbury. I mean, he called a heck of a game, especially early on, was keeping the defense off balance. A lot of movement, as we've seen. Patrick Graham did say he puts those intermediate players in a bit of a bind, and we saw that happening a lot. Some holes were opening up. Guys were able to get out and move. And again, you pair that with the tackle, or lack thereof, the lack of tackling on that 60-yard run there that McNichols goes and busts. I mean, look, that one, I believe the expected yards on that one was 3 yards. Jeremy Chin had him wrapped up, or at least should have had him wrapped up, and then he goes and gains 57 more yards than he should have. 4 different Raiders had a shot at that one. And just going back to that particular point in the game, I got to say, that's to me where the game really flipped, and that's the important point of it. The important part of the game. You have to win the last 4 minutes before the half, and then the first 4 minutes of the second half, especially when you're receiving the ball as well. They go and give up 10 points in the last 3 minutes and 31 seconds of the first half, and then that's kind of where the wheels felt like they were turning off. You think, okay, well, hey, look, at least the Raiders have an opportunity to respond coming out of the second half. That obviously wasn't the case. And you go back and look at it, particularly the big run. That was right after the Raiders had just tied the game up 10-10. So you're thinking something's moving. The offensive line actually started to open up some holes. Ashton Jeanty had runs of 16 and 10 yards. Things are looking good. Trey Tucker, chunk plays for him. They were both balling out. I think Trey had like 45 yards on that drive alone. A solid drive. And you're thinking, okay, this is where the game starts to change. Obviously, we know that doesn't end up happening. Then on the flip side, the defense gets the ball back, and then a couple plays later, that 60-yarder that gets busted, and then they go back, on defense after the offense, goes 3 and out. Defensively, Malcolm Kuntz looks like they have, Mariota bottled up. He's able to escape, and obviously, as he's getting out of the pocket and breaking the pocket, Kuntz reaches up, grabs that face mask, and then they spot him a field goal. Those are where, to me, the most critical moments of the game, and then you come out and you go 3 and out of the half as well. Just a much different Raiders team than we saw from the first game of the season. Obviously, it was a bit janky, when they came out of the gates in the first half in New England, but they come out and really had the play-action passing game going, got the deep passing game going, which we did see early in this game, but it was only in small spurts, and they were just never able to get it going. Ask Jordan Meredith as well about, the protection up front, if they were doing things in terms of blitzing wise or, disguising. And it didn't look like it to me up in the booth. And he said too, he was like, no, it was more an execution thing, which I know is so cliche, but when you've got that and you've got a new offensive line group, a new guy playing center, and they're not able to diagnose and do that, teams are just going to keep eating you alive. And that's exactly what they did in this game. And I think, look, as I noted, you do have to give Ashton Jeanty some credit for what he was able to do in this game. a real tough outing and not a lot of things that he could do. Excuse me as I'm fumbling through the notes here, looking at some of the stats just to pull up what Ashton Genty was able to do. I mean, 17 attempts for 63 yards. There wasn't much meat on the bone in this game for him to be able to do anything. So, like, one of these days they're going to have to get this guy going. I said this was the game that the offensive line was going to be able to turn it around because I hadn't been super impressed with the front that the Commanders had brought into this game. Obviously the first couple games, like I noted, they only had 4 sacks combined in the first 2 games. I thought, look, there's a lot of talent on that front. Obviously we know that. Just the front 7 really as a whole. But like Deron Payne, Von Miller, Bobby Wagner, those guys were all just eating all day long up front against this offensive line. Just a completely brutal showing. And one of those games that, much like the last game, the Monday Night Football game, is hard to break down because it's so simple to sit here and say, look, the offensive line was horrible. And then you go and look at the defense and the chunk plays and the fact that they just couldn't slow them down in any facet of it. You look on the big one later in the game in what was it? Hang on as I flip through the notes here to try and find this one, guys. I'd taken a note on this. Yeah, the 56-yard fade by McLaurin. It was just one of those things where he just routed up Caillou. He got him to kind of stutter a little. He stuttered like he was going to either break off on a curl or hit out for a quick out. Caillou bit on it, and then boom, over the top. I wasn't impressed with Isaiah Polamalu's game as well. You look on the big run that McNichols burst there. He comes downhill, and he even actually stopped because I think he thought the play was wrapped up. Now, again, not on him because it should have been wrapped up. He should have been taken down. He stops his feet, though. Then he takes off. He's too far behind. Can't catch him. Then even on that one as well, where's Polamalu over the top to be able to come down to help him out? I know they were in a cover 3, but, still, you need guys to be able to bail each other out when there's issues going like that, and we're not seeing that from the Raiders. And so it's been real tough for them just overall. And again, guys, as I say, one of these games that is a hard one to sit here and talk about because you go and look at it, and this one just shaped up for the Raiders to possibly be able to, correct the ship, right the ship, and start maybe a bit of a trend, get rolling, do something. You know what I mean? You got the game against the Commanders who come into this with a backup quarterback, so you're thinking, okay, this one should be one of those games that the Raiders win. Again, new coaching staff, better coach that has all kinds of years of experience. And then a dud here against Washington. They go lose at 41-24. Then the following week, as you look at it, Chicago should look like one of those games you can win. But now after this game, how confident can you feel about what the Raiders are going to be able to do in that game? You can't. You got Indianapolis, who's playing really well with Indiana Jones, out there at quarterback. Daniel Jones obviously has been playing very good football for them. They go and blast the Titans today. And then after that, you see the Titans. That's the first game where you sit there and think, okay, maybe a bit of a breather. But again, after a game like today, and I know this is a really good Commanders team, even without Jaden Daniels, but after a game like today, I just don't know how you feel confident about any team. This team needs to show you guys at home, Raider Nation, a little something to give you some sort of life and hope, I guess, for the season. And that's the thing that's really, again, just so frustrating as a media member sitting up here covering it because you leave thinking, okay, what are the things to build off of from this? And obviously, you point to Trey Tucker. A lot of those were in garbage time. But if they can find a way to consistently run the ball, you get a bit of an idea on that drive when they drive down and tie things up at 10. That's a bit of an idea of what this offense could look like if they're able to do that. And that's one thing that I also have to mention is look what Ashton Genty was able to do when there was some room, when he had a little time to look and, make his reads. He was doing a great job with his jump cuts, taking off, finding the holes to be able to create some room there and burst away for some runs. I mean, he goes and has runs of 11 and 16 yards. We see him, as the game wears on, just continuing to find those little holes anytime that they were there. He had a long of 18 yards. So, there were some times when he was able to take advantage of it. But when you're getting blasted in the backfield like that, as soon as you touch the ball, I don't care how talented you are not going to be able to get things rolling. So, what's the answer going to be? I don't know. Maybe you need to throw more of the motions in there. Try and get the defense to be thinking or overthinking things. You know what I mean? From a Chip Kelly standpoint. Obviously, a lot of people wondering why he's sticking so much to that play action passing game, even though it's not working. And I know Geno hasn't had the most time in the world. And he was holding on to the ball a bit here and sometimes, and I'll get into that. But I think the play action passing game, stick to that because it at least gives the defense something to think about. We've seen it work for them a handful of times. Obviously, on the first play of the game, they do that. Jacoby breaks it off for, I believe it was 45 yards, if I remember right, on the first play of the drive there. And then they go quite a while before they have another chunk play, but then they got things going again with Trey Tucker in that regard too. So I like that Chip stays with the play action passing game, even if the running game isn't necessarily there. To me, that's just something that just gives the defense one more thing to think about. So that's, again, why I think maybe we do need to see more of Chip moving guys around a lot more in the backfield. And we've seen some of it. We saw Trey getting involved. But I think the different personnel groupings, hide a Brock Bowers a little more, move him around like we saw in the second half. He's lining up in so many different positions. And I know he's not quite right yet either, as he's dealing with that knee injury. But at a certain point, you have to put the defense in a bind. Obviously, they lose Mayer, so their 12 personnel takes a bit of a hit. Now, they do like Ian Thomas, and he played a lot of snaps in this game. He, too, struggled pass blocking as well. But he's another guy they can move around and use things with. And this is one of those things where, again, in the receiving core, when Brock isn't quite right, you don't have a true number one that can go out there and win and just get the consistency going for you. You know what I mean? Like, if the offense isn't quite moving, Jordan Meredith said it after the game. It's almost like a car. You just have to push. They obviously weren't able to do that, but you need a guy that can get you going in the short passing game, and that's something we haven't seen as much from them either, whether it's on the slants or the crossers, stuff like that. The Raiders need to be able to protect Geno so he can even get those short passes off. Now, I do think there were times when he's holding onto the ball, but for you guys at home, and us up in the press box, there weren't a lot of times where when he's holding on the ball, guys are open downfield. Things hadn't quite developed just yet from my viewpoint, after this one. As I'm watching it, I'm just thinking so many times there's not a whole lot that he can do in this regard in terms of trying to get it to his guys. They're just not finding the open space right now and not having enough time to do it. The routes aren't developing. So, again, maybe go to some more of the short, quick passes, whether it's, again, the dink and dunk out of the backfield, quick slants, crossers, moving guys around, a lot of the motion and things like that we thought we were going to see that we just haven't yet. Find a way to make things easier on your offensive line. And it's so hard to coach around an offensive line. But it looks like they're going to have to figure out a way to do that. Now, again, you look at the positive, the fact that Trey Tucker has a good game. Hopefully that can continue, give defenses a little bit more to think about. But again, it's back to the drawing board for the Raiders. Got to figure it out. Again, I give Geno credit for what he was able to do in this game today, given as horrible as things looked for him in that game against the Chargers. He comes out and, makes the most of a really bad situation, goes 19 of 29 for 289 yards and 3 touchdowns. I don't think there was a lot of meat left on the bone for him to be able to do anything. As I noted, he's getting harassed back there in the pocket. We saw him multiple times not throw into horrible coverage situations like we did in the game against the Chargers. The one throw that comes to mind for me was the one on that deep curl to Dante Thornton. The bad route by him. He just kind of sits on it and didn't, work his way back to the quarterback. That's something you got to be able to fight through contact. That's a young player that hopefully will learn that and help him out in that situation. That was on a 3rd down, but you could just see the frustration from Geno out there, from Ashton as well. Just not a whole lot you can do. And I go back to what we saw from Josh Jacobs a couple years ago, where he's talking about the fact that, like, if the holes just aren't there, there's only so much I can do. You know what I mean? And that's what I think it is. So the biggest thing, and you guys know it, I know it, it's not rocket science. Got to figure out a way to fix things along the offensive line. And maybe it just comes down to making things simpler for that group up front. You know what I mean? Whether it's Geno handling the calls, Jordan Meredith obviously helping to identify, what's going on in front of them, but just too many free rushers. When you have 5 unblocked pressures, that is not good. DJ Glaze, again, needs to improve. We saw, a handful of times where he's getting pushed back into Geno's lap and the pocket's just collapsing. As a quarterback, when you just don't have confidence in the guys around you being able to protect you, there's not much you are going to be able to do. Again, it's one of those things, guys, I feel like I'm kind of rambling here, and so I apologize for that, but it's just one of those games where you leave wondering what's next, And for the Raiders, it boils down to week in and week out, they are going to have to find a way to establish the running game. And it's tough, again, when guys are getting stood up right off of the jump. But we saw glimpses of it when they drive down and tie the game of what this offense can look like. You run the ball and you hit guys on those deep crossers like Trey and get them involved, And not only that, I think when you have a fully healthy Brock Bowers, you can start to get that 3-headed attack, for this offense. And I think I talked about it a couple days ago on the podcast where you get Genty going and then you play off of each other with Jacoby and Brock. And then Trey comes in from time to time. You take your deep shots with Dante Thornton too, and get the ball to these guys in space and let them run. So what we need to see from Chip going forward, figure out a way to get the ball out of Geno's hands quick, because obviously, again, the offensive line not handling their business, not able to block, and let these guys go run. There's so much speed on this offense that needs to be taken advantage of better. And we saw it in training camp where guys were getting the ball, with room to run. Somehow they need to be able to get these guys some room to run and to be able to put that athleticism on display. One more thing that just popped in my head before we start to close this one out. We're seeing a lot of Dylan Laube, especially in the passing situations or the 2-minute offense towards the tail end of the first half. The team really likes him as their scat back. I do not know how you can draft a guy like Ashton Jeanty, who his junior year in college led the nation receiving by a running back, and you don't put him out there. I understand the whole load management thing and all that stuff, but you got to get this guy going, because if Jeanty gets going, whether it's in the passing game or in the running game, you can see the energy and the life that it'll bring to this offense as a whole. I mean, look at the way Jeanty runs when he does have room, when he's got a lane and he can get a full head of steam behind him. He's trucking guys when those opportunities present themselves. And if they can find a way to get him moving consistently, that's going to inject so much life into this offense. And so again, this is no knock on Dylan Laube, but when you draft a player like Ashton Jeanty, he needs to be your money guy in those key situations before the half, right out of the half. I mean, you need to get him in there and you need to feed him and get him involved in the passing game. Again, let that guy get the ball in space and do his thing. That's something that can spark him in the run game too. So that to me is a head scratcher. I don't understand why they keep going to that. And again, well, I do, because they want to do the whole load management thing. And I get that it's a long season, but you don't want to let this season get out of hand quickly. So going forward, again, get Jeanty going early, often, right up the gut, whatever the heck it is. Figure out a way so that he gets the ball in his hands quick before he's getting hit, more than half a yard behind the line of scrimmage, or taking a couple different, maybe 3 steps before he has contact. So find a way to create some space for him. Let him move. Let him run, and then you can play off of that with getting Jacoby and Brock involved. And again, just more movement overall. Give the defense more to think about, because right now they're just pinning their ears back and they're not worried about it. Again, if all these pressures are coming, and again, it didn't seem like they were blitzing too much. I'll have to go back and review the film to kind of get a better look at all of that. But if they're moving and guys are rushing the quarterback like that, there's obviously space behind them. So replace where they vacated with bodies, with players to go move and run in space. That's what we need to see from the offense going forward. And again, from the defense, man, look more like the defense we saw in the second half against the Patriots. The pressures, the defensive line obviously wasn't doing a great job today of overall. I got to give credit to Cliff Kingsbury and all the movement. There were multiple times we're up in the press box wondering who the heck has the ball. And if we're thinking that, the defense is thinking that as well. And that's where a lot of those chunk plays came from, for them. So again, shore up the tackling, get the defensive line involved and moving again, because again, we've talked about the fact that it's a young secondary. We saw them have some issues today on the back end. Again, the chunk plays against some of these deep shots. But, as cliche as it is, win the game in the trenches. If you do that, you're going to have a much better shot. We'll see how they fare against the Bears team that for the most part has struggled. Again, as I said, they're playing right now as I'm shooting this, so I don't know how it's going, but we will be diving into that. I'm going to be catching up with a guy from Chicago to dive into that matchup for our upcoming podcast on Tuesday as well. See what he's seeing on tape from them, going forward, and maybe how the Raiders can try to attack it. That's going to be one of the deals. It's going to be real interesting to see how the Raiders now look as they get set to go to week 4, sitting at 1-2. Absolutely needing a win. Otherwise, you do start to sound the alarm and you wonder what the next handful of weeks are going to look like. Because, again, as you look at the schedule here, we'll go pull it back up again as I dive through this. Bears, that one's a toss-up now. Should have been one where you leave this game against Washington feeling really good about it. Indianapolis, they've been moving. They look like a machine. Obviously, Tennessee has been struggling. That's one game you like the Raiders in, but who knows what Raiders version shows up. Then you got Kansas City, Jacksonville, Denver, Dallas, Cleveland, who come away with a big upset there. The Chargers, so it ain't getting easy for the Raiders anytime soon. So they do need to figure out a way to right this ship and start playing some quality football, start looking more like the team we saw in the second half there, or at least the team, second half of the opening game of the season that is, or at least the team that drove down the field, tied the game up at 10, looked like the game was going to start swaying in their favor. And that all begins, as cliche as it is, and I'm sure some folks in the comments are going to be tired of hearing me say this, but get the running game going. I think the answer to that would be insert Jackson Powers-Johnson back in there. He's not going to play center, and I can kind of see why you wouldn't really go that way with him, because he does have the concussion issues. I think they're a little worried about that going forward. Another reason why you sit him today. So we'll just see what happens along that offensive line, but I think after a day like today, you got to throw Jackson back in there. and figure out a way to get things rolling, specifically on the right side of that offensive line. That's where we've seen a lot of struggles. But again, today it happens all over the offensive line. So figure out a way to stabilize that group, and maybe that changes things for the Raiders. Again, guys, we'll be back on the podcast on Tuesday. Thank you guys for listening as we dive into what was just one of those head scratchers of a game for the Raiders where you wonder how the heck they show up like this. But we'll see when they go back to the drawing board this coming week if they can have a better showing. And I hope for you guys they do, because I know it's tough for you guys at home to watch something like this. So hopefully we won't have to deal with this anymore going forward. But we'll see how it all goes. With that, guys, thanks for listening and watching, and we'll catch you guys next time.